Good morning, everybody. We're going to begin. I'm Joe Haggerty. I'm the CEO of the Alexandria Chamber of Commerce. Welcome. You know, our mission is supporting business and cultivating community. So we're going to continue that this morning. We've done 20 or 30 Zoom webinars in the last few weeks and had hundreds of people on them. But this morning, we're going to get ready to open. So we're going to do design, legal, and health guidance for reopening your business. We understand the elected officials in Northern Virginia are talking with the governor about opening this Friday. I think you probably all know about the date, the 29th. So we don't know the final results of their discussions, but we know they're shooting for the 29th. Just in terms of how we'll proceed, we have 3 different speakers this morning. Elizabeth will be talking about design. She is with DCS Designs. Robert Dunstan is an attorney with Saul Ewing, Onstein & Lur, and he'll be talking about legal guidance. And the famous Rachel Stradling, who is with the health department here in Alexandria, will be talking about health programs and the ALX Promise program that they are getting ready to open. That will give a special sticker if you've met all of the health requirements to open and to serve people. Before we get going, the chairman of the Chamber Board is here with us, Dave Millard. Dave has been on many of these Zoom discussions with us. We've had lots of board and executive committee meetings to keep the Chamber going in terms of helping our members and getting information out. So I'd like to have Dave also welcome you. Dave Millard. David.
Good morning, everyone. And I want to thank once again the Chamber staff for just a fantastic effort over the last 10 to 12 weeks and for really, turning on a dime to turn the Chamber into a virtual way of identifying key issues that we need to address during this period of uncertainty. This is a great panel, and I'm glad, and thanks to each of the panelists for agreeing to join us today. I want to thank all the Chamber members who are on the call for their continued support of the Chamber and for continued suggestions of new ideas for ways in which the Chamber can be helpful in this difficult time. This is an exciting next page as we begin to think about first steps to restart as safely as we can the economic engine that is Alexandria. And without further comment, I'll just turn it back over to Joe. Thanks again.
Thanks, David. Okay, let's get going. The first speaker is going to be Elizabeth Blunk. She's a project director with DCS Designs, and she's going to share some office design best practices for reopening. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Joe. So just to give you a little bit more background, I wanted to let you know that the clients that I typically work with are make up a combination of building owners and developers, government agencies and government contractors, commercial real estate brokers, construction managers, and tenants such as associations, corporations, and law firms. So we have a huge range of clients that we typically deal with, and this is definitely a hot topic for everyone. I work at a 70-person local architecture and design firm. Like many of you, we've been under quarantine and working remotely since mid-March. And that's when kind of the severity of this pandemic started to escalate. Now, from a work and production standpoint, many of us are already set up to work remotely with the current technology, the internet, the Teams, the Zoom, GoToMeeting, email, and all that other types of correspondence. We've been able to, get work done and a combination of these platforms, but it's getting a little tricky. For my practice, we work on a lot of teams, and I know a lot of our clients have project goals, and it's getting a little bit more tricky for that type scenario. Now, people are social beings, and many of us want to go back to the workspace. Many companies are taking a look at how they're going to encourage their staff to come back, and that's what the main topic is today. So how are we going to get everyone to feel comfortable and safe enough to go back into the office setting? Safety is an important thing. Comfort is an important thing, and those are the things that we want to pay close attention to as they go back into kind of this new normal for the office workforce. As we see it, there are two levels of safeguarding the office workspace. There's an immediate level of things that can be done, and then there's more of a long-term level of things that can be done, because as a lot of people are saying, this isn't over yet. I mean, you know, people are just going to want to safeguard more and more as time goes on. Now, there are two key elements that we're going to talk about as we go through this. We're going to reiterate on that 6-foot social distancing, and we're going to talk about about the germ removal from your hands and from containment into that could access into a person's, you know, system. So we want to walk through a scenario of a person going to the workforce or the workday. First of all, transportation is one of the elements that people are going to have to deal with in order to get into the work. There are metros and buses and public means of transportation, but I don't think people are feeling that those are as safe as they could be. So if they have an opportunity to walk or bike to work, they're going to do so. People are feeling safer outside than they are inside right now. Their own car, if people want to use their own car to get to work, that's another thing where they're feeling safe within those parameters. So once they get to the office building that they're in, it takes on a certain platform where a lot of the building owners or property managers are doing their best to make sure that all their tenants are feeling safe coming into the office building. So most of us already have a security card or a key fob that gives us access to, you know, parking garages, building entry doors after hours, suite entrances, restrooms, and some of the amenity spaces that are in the office building, which is great. It's our own card. It has, you know, kind of, it's within our own possession, so nobody else is using it. But a lot of times, in order to get into those spaces, you still have to use your hand to open the door. So with the installation of motion activated security access door openers are going to be a newer element that we're going to be seeing. You could also leave doors propped open, but the level of security and the containment of the HVAC systems and keeping those regular, that's going to be an issue for those. And so at the end result is you are still going to be opening doors with your hands, but sanitary wipes, sanitary lotions, dispensers, those are going to be adjacent and all over lobbies, office spaces, things like that, with trash cans nearby if you want to, you know, throw away any of the sanitary wipes. There are many designs that are coming on the market that are a little bit more aesthetically pleasing to put in your lobby spaces. They're not, you know, these plastic elements. They're coming up with some nice designs, but those are going to be a huge element to deal with antimicrobial germs that could get to your hands, get to your face, things like that. So the next thing you do after you get into the office building is you have to get access to your floor. The elevators, they're putting a maximum capacity on the elevators. It's most of the times you'll see a 2-person maximum capacity. Escalators are a way to get you up and down the stands, but you have to touch handrails. The cleaning group has to come through. Escalators aren't usually typically in office buildings. Stairs is another way that people are going to want to get back some of that exercise that they've been lacking in the past couple months and go upstairs, use stairs, but it has its limitations. You know, handicapped people, people with bad knees and things, if you're on like the, you know, 10th floor, people are not going to want to use those stairs as much as you'd like. So that's not a go-to. So elevators are typically going to be used, and with the cleaning crews in the buildings, wiping down the elevator, the buttons, things like that, doing some kind of like not hourly cleaning, but a lot more cleaning of the space is going to cause a more of a safety element for all the pedestrians in the building. Now, signage is going to be another key thing that you're going to see throughout the space and that you're going to want to use in your office. And it's basically signage to tell people how you're safeguarding the space. It's going to set the stage for how they're going to follow directions. But they do recommend friendly signage, nothing to stress people out. So they don't want to say, you know, wear your face mask in the space. It's going to be more, you know, say, you know, face masks are strongly encouraged in this location. The maximum capacity for this elevator will be 2 people. There may be, you know, arrows and circulation paths that people are going to tell you to walk through to keep the circulation flow happening. But it needs to be friendly and not stressful. So another key element that you're going to see a lot of, besides the signage of how people are going to follow suit, are hand sanitizers that we already touched on, not just in building lobbies and things, but in your own office space. You know, lotions, wipes, things like that. They're going to be at restrooms, like your office space, and in maybe your conference rooms, things like that, where people are touching those handles and walking around, and you know, potential spread of germs. Thermoscans are also something that are designed so that you can walk into a building and it can, you know, take your temperature. And this is just one safeguard measure that, you know, you could prevent people with potential fevers of entering into a space. There's also manual temperature guides. I know I've gone to the dentist office recently and they took my temperature just with a manual thing on a manual gauge on my forehead. So those are, you know, going to be something that a receptionist could have at the desk. And if you have a group of visitors coming, you may want to do something such as taking the temperatures, just so that people are seeing that safeguarded measure that people entering the office space are being monitored in some way, shape, or form. Seating and meeting spaces is another thing that we're going to talk about. In reception areas, people are taking away sofas. They have just individual chairs. Once again, that 6-foot spacing is going to be taken into account, where the chairs are going to be further apart. They're not necessarily going to be facing each other. There might be fewer pieces of seating furnishings around in a space, but that 6-foot rule is going to typically apply there. Also in lunchrooms, you may start incorporating dividers, either with panels or plants or something decorative, you know, in between tables and chairs, so that people have a little bit more of a sense of their own space and that it's not so contiguous. Conference rooms, this is a tricky area where, you know, it was important to, you know, how many people can we fit around the table? How many chairs can we get in this conference room? Well, that number is going to be reduced based on current trends, where instead of a 12-person conference room, it may only be a 6-person conference room, because a lot of those chairs are either going to be set aside or removed and put in some type of storage room, so that once again, we can have more of a 6-foot spacing in between the occupants of a conference room. That also applies to training rooms, mini meeting rooms, huddle rooms that would, you know, you could fit 4 before. 4 people probably may not be sitting in those huddle rooms. It may be more of 2, or just the one person that feels better working in that type of environment. Now, the workspace itself, we're going to talk about the desks and offices and things. I mean, we've been working for the last decade to reduce offices and, you know, put people in workstations, reduce the size of the footprint of the workstation, because people don't have as much paper. They have more, you know, computer screens. So all of that is going to have another look being drawn to it, where people are not going to want to feel comfortable sitting with somebody that feels like they're 4 feet away. Once again, take a look at the footprint of the workstation layout and provide more of that 6-foot spacing that you have distance between people. Also, people facing each other is going to be a little bit more uncomfortable than it was before. And maybe providing some type of a barrier between stations. Now, we took panel heights of workstations down to bring more natural light into the space. You could still have that same effect with acrylic panels, glass panels, things like that, that provide a little bit more of an enclosure in the workspace without blocking light and things like that. But the best part of all this is the flexibility that the furniture has. A lot of the workstations are reconfigurable. You can take a look at manipulating them to possibly space them out within the area. And And working off of that is the fact that some groups are talking about, I know our firm's talking about working in shifts more, where one group of designers and architects may work remotely on certain days and may work together in the offices on other days, so that there's not 100% capacity going back to the office. There's just designated groups going back and working together. I know we have a lot of resources at our office that we still need to get to that people don't have within their home means. And working in shifts is going to be another way of looking at the office settings. If you have outdoor balcony space that you have, that's a part of your leased space, people are feeling safer outdoors. Set that up as kind of a mini meeting space. And, if it gets too cold, maybe you have some type of an air controlled like heater or something out there. But people are, as you can see, people are outside more now, walking the dogs more, just getting that fresh air is a safety factor for them. And if you can make something of those outdoor spaces, that would be really nice for your staff as they go back into the work setting. In restrooms, we recommend paper towels. Don't use the air dryers. Use the paper towels. Hopefully the restrooms are going to have more of those automatic door openers too. So these are just some of the things that we're seeing a lot more of. There's a lot of products that are being designed that we're used to implementing, and that we're seeing a rise in, as far as materials to wipe down seating, flooring product that's more antimicrobial, even hardware. There's certain hardware we're going to be using a lot more of that holds germs less. These are all part of some of the studies and products that are being brought out right now, and that we're tying into some of the newer designs that are already on the boards that you're going to see more into the future. That's it.
That's it for now. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so
Sure.
much. We're going to turn to the legal aspect now. But first, if you have questions, just put them in the chat box. And at the end of the 3 presentations, we'll get to as many questions as possible. So again, I want to introduce Robert Dunstan. He's a partner at Saul, Ewing, Onstein & Luhr, and he's going to go over legal guidance. Robert, I just want you to know Andrew Palmieri is on this. One of your partners is here too with us. He's the general counsel for the chamber, so he'll be watching you.
Yes, I am well aware. I'm well aware that Andrew is there with. Thank you, Joe. I've been doing employment law for 35 years and grew up in the area. And it is a busy time to be an employment lawyer. When we talk about reopening, we are talking today about physically reopening spaces that have been closed, all but shut down or limited staff. Of course, many businesses have been reopened the entire time. Maybe some on this call have been reopened in limited ways because they were essential businesses. And we have a lot of lessons that we've learned over the last 2 months from all of those businesses that have been open and what they've been dealing with. And you all have been reading about it every day in the Post and the struggles of different businesses. The key takeaway I want to give you, if you remember nothing else, is don't promise anything that you not only have the capacity to do, but that you will enforce or that your managers will enforce. The biggest thing we're dealing with to get our employees back and our customers back into physical spaces is fear and anxiety. And that's all tied to safety or perceptions of safety. And whatever you're going to do, whether it's in hand washing requirements or more stringent health screening or whatever you choose to think is being enough, or as simple as whether or not you're requiring masks in your spaces, you have to make certain that you're going to do. And what we've heard about a lot from employees in a wide range of businesses. Well, I hear it from my wife and from others who, if you've been out, you're paying attention to, are employees wearing masks? Are they sanitizing regularly? Is this a grocery store or someplace that's being maintained clean and sanitary? The employees and your customers are going to be watching exactly what everybody's doing. And I have heard lots of stories of shift supervisors or managers or coworkers who just don't want to follow the rules or fail to or don't take them seriously enough. And that's had adverse reactions on employees and on customers. So don't promise it unless you're going to enforce it, whatever your own rules are going to be. For the legal issues, it's basically those involving your employees and those involving customers. And a lot of it does go around both liability, but also that fear factor. So getting your employees back to work, there was an interesting article today in one of the legal rags that summed up 4 key questions that were a lot of what I was going to be talking about anyway. Can somebody refuse to report to work? This is what your employees are thinking. Can I refuse to go to work? Will I lose my unemployment comp if I refuse? Does my employer have to protect me? And what happens if I'm going to get sick? And that summarizes a lot of the issues and concerns for employees. You want to get people back to work. And there will be people, can you require people to come back to work into a physical space? As a general rule, the answer is yes. And you can, and refusal can result in discharge. It may, refusal to work probably will result in denial of unemployment comp and losing your unemployment comp. But there are some exceptions to these issues that you need to be aware of. As we think about safety and for those who want to be generous to their employees, you have to think about those who are more vulnerable, those who are higher risk because of age, because of medical conditions, or somebody in their family who is. Those individuals, at least those who are more vulnerable themselves of your employees, probably do have protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act if you're covered in large enough, or under the Virginians with Disabilities Act, which many of you may know that the civil rights laws in Virginia have just been revised a whole lot tougher, and it's now actually serious claims that can be brought for disability or other discrimination and with potential liability for most employers. So in those areas, you will want to give consideration to continuing work from home if possible as an accommodation, and deal with those populations. But even if it's not them, it's a family member, it's a child, or if they've got employees with continued childcare obligations if schools don't reopen, there's going to be a sensitivity there that's going to lead a lot of businesses to want to be able to continue allowing telework if it works out for them. But in some cases, you have to find employees and you have to have them in physical spaces. So yes, you generally can expect them to be in. The other areas of protection, if somebody asserts safety issues or asserts their rights, there are potential claims if you terminate or remove somebody for complaining about safety issues. Potential OSHA liability, National Labor Relations Act liability. What about the liability if people get sick? It's going to be a workers' comp claim for any of your employees, and workers' comp is going to be exclusive. It will be hard to prove workplace exposure as those cases spin out, but you don't worry about tort claims from them. There is always a risk if somebody picks up COVID, they say at work, and then takes it back home of some kind of tort claim. I think that's going to be very hard to prove both factually and legally, and we don't know how those claims will spin out. But for employees, we have some employers who are at least thinking about having employees sign releases that if you come into work and you get sick and you go home and your child gets sick or worse, that you are relieving of liability. Not very many people want to do that. It's the reason why Congress is, where there's a lot of lobbying for liability protections, but it's something that some employers are considering. On the customer side, getting the customers back is again a perception of safety issue, and there is a liability concern. Liability concerns for exposure of your workers to customers and vendors and others. There are many businesses that are not requiring their customers to wear masks, but they are requiring their vendors and other visitors to take various precautions. Now, legal rule number 1, I should have said, is you got to obey all of the orders. So whatever the restrictions are, the starting point is the governor's orders and and any city orders, any legal orders that are imposed. You have to comply with them, and you have to make certain your customers comply with them. So if you are under orders where you have to wear masks into a particular space, then that's something you need to figure out how to enforce. And that whole dynamic of refusing access to people who are not wearing masks or who will not follow safety rules is something that's a big concern to a lot of employers. You've heard some stories about confrontations and even people being shot. The example in Michigan for trying to enforce legal orders on mask wearing. So that's a big training issue and an issue that you got to talk about with our employees on how to insist on that in a way that still keeps as many customers as possible, but the same thing applies to following your own rules. If you choose to tell your customers wear masks, what are you going to do when they say no? Or any other precautions that they want to take on those issues. The liability issues for customers are low. The likelihood of a customer being able to show that they contracted COVID-19 just from walking into your space for a period of time is pretty low. But there are businesses, some large retail businesses, restaurants. Well, if you've been to a doctor or a dentist recently, you've seen the liability waivers. As hair salons opened up, I've already seen a number of hair salons and other personal appointment folks who have waivers that basically sign your life away because you're acknowledging risks of COVID when you sit down to get your nails done or your hair cut. And those are going to get fairly common. There are a lot of good examples out there. The risk is low, but particularly for physicians' offices, those are important waivers to have. But if you've got any kind of personal attendance services with close contact, that's the nature of your business, you got to think about liability waivers from your customers just as an added source of protection. It's just a big assumption of risk issue, big assumption of risk document. So you have the compliance with those issues. For both your employees and your customers, you have discrimination issues. You've probably read about discrimination claims against the Asian American community, restaurants, and individuals, with the idea that this is the China or the Asian pandemic. I think it's now the American pandemic, but those perceptions and those issues go on around the country. You've got disability discrimination issues against your employees or others if you perceive them to have the illness and as a result take adverse action. But let me say clearly, always, not only can you refuse access to employees who are sick or who have any of the symptoms, and you can refuse access to customers. If the customer is coughing or sneezing and people are uncomfortable, you can ask them to leave. And you have the rights to refuse service to anybody. And if you want to ask all the screening questions in the world, you can require employees to take temperatures. You can do all kinds of things legally. The EEOC has blessed it from the employment law standpoint, and any of those screenings are things that you can do as a business, both for your customers and your employees. I'll add one more thing, that in addition to the government orders, obviously we're paying attention most importantly to public health. CDC guidelines when they're available, WHO guidelines, and particularly, and this is going to be throwing it to Rachel, public health, because a lot of this, ultimately with limited CDC guidelines, a lot of issues come down to what your local public health authorities, both at the state level and at the local level, are recommending or permitting. And to give you just a simple example, which is contact tracing and disclosure of names to employees. You may have read some articles about employers being caught between a rock and a hard place of wanting to keep coworkers safe, but how do I do that if I can't disclose the name of somebody who got sick or ill or is symptomatic, or that I find out has had exposure to somebody? Because lo and behold, that's confidential medical information under the ADA and other laws. And if I disclose that information without the consent of the employee, then I'm putting myself at risk. There are 2 exceptions to that. If I get permission from the employee to share with colleagues and coworkers that they were sick, or if government authorities direct me to do so as part of contact tracing. So when you read things about individuals and companies saying they're just going to aggressively take names and do their own contact tracing and reveal it, they're actually taking chances and hoping that, you know, what they do for protecting other workers, they're not going to get sued for privacy violations. But if the health department, if you, when you inform, and you should inform of any exposures to the health department, but when you do so, if they permit contact tracing, then you're safe. So those are the key issues. We could go on and on. One of the other issues, just to add to what the initial discussion, is dealing with your landlords. One of the big issues a lot of folks will be dealing with, they're already dealing with it with rent abatement, but you're going to have overlapping requirements between what you want to do in your space and what your landlord is doing and what expectations they impose on tenants. Because particularly in shared use facilities and that have common areas, there will be building owners who are trying to also control the flow of people and work and customers and dealing with these same safety issues on a premises-wide basis. So there's going to be a lot of discussion back and forth with your landlords as you reopen on juggling their rules as well as the ones you want to impose for your employees. So those are the key hot topics. I'll just finally throw out, when somebody gets sick, yes, they need to be removed from the workplace. And you all are covered. Most of you are going to have less than 500 employees. So you're covered under the, you know, extended paid sick leave laws, extended family medical leave laws, which give paid leave rights, partially paid leave rights. And you didn't really have to deal with those when you were open before. And now that was the first of the federal laws that were passed. And those rights will attach to most of your employees that have child care obligations and care for others or are sick or vulnerable. What they don't protect is somebody who's just fearful and doesn't want to come in because they're just scared. And you need to address that too.
Rob, thank you so much. Thanks. We have questions coming in and we'll get to them in a minute. But last speaker is Rachel Stradling from the Alexandria Health Department. We've been working with Rachel for months now. She's been really helpful. And she's going to talk about the ALX Promise Program. Rachel.
Thank you. So the ALX Promise Program was introduced as a way to help businesses to reopen safely and gradually. It basically consists of, the first step is that you register online. At that stage, one of my EHS specialists will contact you to set up a time for a one-to-one consultation. The reason that we're doing the one-to-ones and the small group consultations is because every business is slightly different. And from experience, we've had an awful lot of questions relating to how the checklist and the governor's requirements actually relate to a specific business. So to make it easier, we've put the one-to-one in. So once you've had the one-to-one, we send you lots of really helpful information and training materials. The training materials cover the key aspects of compliance. So, for example, the social distancing, wearing face coverings, cleaning, disinfection, and then obviously the requirements that are specific to your business. There are a lot of different businesses out there in Alexandria. Many we haven't regulated before, so we're learning with you. So once you've got those materials, there is a checklist, which we've tried to customize to a lot of the different businesses, and we are adapting as we go, and obviously as the phases change, we'll adapt the checklist accordingly. So there is a training component. We request that you train your staff on social distancing, on face coverings, to make sure that they really understand what those requirements are, because that is what is going to help us to have a safe and gradual reopening, is making sure that the staff really know what those requirements are. So once you've done those, we'll send you out a pledge. The pledge is basically an agreement that allows you to display our ALX Promise decal. And if for any reason, if there's a phase change and you can't make the changes for the new requirements, we just ask that you take down your ALX Promise promotion materials. So we're not coming out and policing it and routinely checking on you. There is obviously, if somebody makes a complaint that a business is displaying our ALX Promise decal and they're not wearing face coverings or they're not doing something else that's required, then obviously we'll reach out to them. We see this as a way to help the business community, and that's really what we felt strongly about. So that's kind of the ALX Promise scheme in a nutshell. For those, it's a totally voluntary scheme, and for those businesses that don't want to participate, that's fine, it's voluntary, and we're going to put all of our materials up on our website so that you can use our training materials, use our checklists, and we'll link obviously to all of the governor's information as that changes too.
Rachel, there's a question here. How will we be receiving the sticker, the decal?
So we're arranging with our awesome MRC volunteers to get those out to businesses once they've gone through the scheme. So they're currently being printed. So we're hopeful that if the governor makes the announcement that Northern Virginia is reopening in some capacity this week, that those stickers will be ready to distribute.
Okay, and another short question. What is the link to find out about the ALX Promise?
Oh, and it looks like somebody has posted it beneath, so thank you.
There you go, okay. The link is now posted. Elizabeth, Rachel, thank you so much. Thanks for all you've been doing, and I know the hundreds of hours you've been putting in every week. Let's jump back to Elizabeth. There's a question here from a cider bar. I wonder who that might be. Probably Lost Boy. How do we deal with customers in terms of social distancing when we have a cider bar?
When there's a cider bar?
Yes. They have a bar and they've had tables set up in the past. I don't know exactly what the new configuration will be, but.
Well, once again, it goes back to the 6-foot spacing. And the lines will have a larger spacing to them. And as far as seating goes, there needs to be just the spacing that's being more respectful to the person that are sitting there, the people that are sitting there with some type of screen, be it plants or something that kind of separates them from the next table, that could be in that space.
Okay. And Rob, I think you mentioned this, but there's a question here about the law regarding taking someone's temperature or even asking for their medical records, an employee.
Yeah, I'm looking at those in the chat, Joe, so I can go ahead and respond. So the first question from Steve is whether there are any laws against taking temperature records or requesting medical records. Well, that's two very different issues. The EEOC has actually had pandemic guidance ever since the SARS pandemic that says when you're in a pandemic, you have lots of flexibility to ask medical questions and to even take temperatures and to do screening for that condition and for that virus. And you can do that legally, and that doesn't violate any other rights or obligations under any of the federal employment laws. And that guidance is being followed at all kinds of different levels by other agencies under other laws. So, and by the screening, we're talking about, have you been exposed to anybody in 14 days? Are you having any of the following symptoms? Have you been to high-risk areas? That's becoming less and less of a question because there are so many high-risk areas. But that kind of screening of your employees or even of your customers, if you have any of the following, please don't come in. Those are all permitted. Now, the ADA and other privacy protections do bar full release of medical records unless you have a good reason. So if you're talking about wanting a whole medical history or diagnoses or underlying medical conditions, then you are getting into ADA issues. But the kind of screening you want to do for potential COVID-19 exposure is perfectly legitimate. The FAQs that the EEOC have up on their website are plain English and easy to follow. I see another question here about our requirements if a patron informs us that they have the virus and we're in our business and possibly exposed to others, do we have to notify our clientele? This is coming from a Sun Cycle, a fitness business. There are no legal requirements unless the public health authorities direct you to on what you must do to contact anybody else. If you know, and this is going to be inevitable, if you have people back to work, people are going to get sick, they are going to be exposed, you will have to deal with what I say to other employees or customers. And we go back to, you need permission from the customer. Otherwise, you're just saying somebody was here in this class on this date and who subsequently was diagnosed as having the virus. That would be a permissible disclosure under, under any of the laws. Are you required to? Well, if somebody finds out that you knew about it and did not disclose, and they always will, somewhere, somehow, the customer reaction is going to be even worse than if you just said, somebody was present on this day and they were detected as having the virus on this date and they'd had it for, and they've now been, and this is how long it's been. And you just give that information out and then take extra cleaning steps. That's what most folks are doing in response. The individualized contact, unless it's a contact tracing directed by the health department or with the customer's permission, you're running some risks. And that's that between the rock and the hard place.
Okay, and here's one for either Rachel or Rob. Should we have a guest book for customers to sign so we can do contact tracing if necessary?
I'll say that's becoming a frequent practice in a lot of businesses as a just in case, just as employers are keeping detailed logs of who is in and visitors and everything else. It is an extra means. Now, obviously, if you're dealing with very short exposures and brief transactions, it's far less of a risk as far as the need, but it's an extra step that might be a good precaution. I'd love to hear Rachel's thoughts.
So I would just echo what you said before about obviously releasing people's medical information, and just to reiterate your word of caution on that. And also to remember that if we are doing the good social distancing and we're wearing face coverings, the risk of transmission is minimal at that stage. So make sure that we are implementing all of the rules and the best practice as much as possible.
Okay. Those are all the questions that have been listed. This was to be a 45-minute call, and we're at 45 minutes. So we want to thank all of you. We'd like you to know the staff virtually is working. So if you have follow-up questions or you want us to get you in touch with anyone, just let us know. You can either call, because our phones are all redirected, or send us an email. And thanks to Elizabeth, Rob, and Rachel. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.